Hello and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and uh, unfortunately, but inevitably, I have had to put on our end times background for today's live stream because, as by now I'm sure you are well aware, and not least because of the title of today's live stream, we have to address the events that are unfolding as we speak in the Middle East. Events which have been long foreshadowed in not just in scripture, but by many other individuals who prophesied about the end times. Prophesied, something like that. Anyway, they talked about the times that we're living in now. And we are living in them. And I know that's a dangerous sort of thing to say because people have been saying it for, the better half of 1,000 we're talking about the fact that they were living in the end times. Certainly must have felt that way when they were being persecuted by the Romans. And there have been many occasions since then for many people around the world under many circumstances that they felt as though those circumstances warranted the belief that this is it. These are the signs of the times. These are the signs of the end times. And naturally, many prophecies, but particularly the book of Revelations, because it has both a macro and a micro application. That is, it has this double meaning, as all mythology and all high art, great literature and scripture does. It illustrates, tells a story, narrates some macrocosmic event, i.e., the global flood, the great flood of Noah. But in that narration, in the telling of that macro event, there lays a hidden esoteric teaching that relates to each and every one of us in microcosm, because every human being is the universe in microcosm. We are the world. That the lyrics of that song are literal. You and I and everybody else, we are all the world in microcosm. In the same way that every cell in your body contains your DNA. It was born of your body and it returns to your body after it dies, arguably with some exceptions: fingernails, hair, skin that gets shed, etc. Speaking, we can say that every cell in your body, it's a nanocosm of your body. Or to use to keep it all making sense, the cells in your body are a microcosm of you. You are a microcosm of the earth. That makes every cell in your body a nanocosm of the earth. If you want to, but it's all steps and stages. There's levels and levels and levels and levels and levels, as above, so below. And so there is a reason why all of the Abrahamic religions have as their focal point on this planet Jerusalem. And each one of them holds Jerusalem as sacred ground. And they hold Jerusalem as sacred ground for much the same, albeit nuanced, reasons. You might argue that, well, for Jews, it's because it's the site of the temple, of which there only remains the wall, the one wall. Is it the eastern wall or the western wall? I can't remember which. Unfortunately, I've never been to Jerusalem, not in this lifetime. So I cannot speak with the kind of authority that I might be able to on other matters, having never been there myself. Again, not in this lifetime. But for Christians, obviously, Jerusalem is sacred for the not so much the Temple Mount, but Calvary, Golgotha, and the church of, oh, what is it called? The Tabernacle, the church of anyway, it's the church that is supposedly built on the site where Jesus was crucified. And then there's also, or the site where was the cave where Jesus was buried and rose from the dead. And anyway, there's all sorts of sacred sites related to Christianity, directly to Christianity, that are present in Jerusalem. And then to Islam, they have the Dome of the Rock, and they have their own particular reasons for them that is sacred ground and inherently essential to their faith. And so in that sense, this focal point for the world, for the three Abrahamic religions, has been this focus of strife and conflict for millennia. Indeed, it began between the Jews and Christians. But then again, when Islam was born and spread like wildfire through the Middle East, then it took on a new significance for an entire new faction of, we could say, a new sect, but in truth it's a new religion, a new Abrahamic religion. And of course, those three groups, faiths, whatever you want to call them, they've also been political collectives. And unfortunately, they've also been military collectives. And there has been much blood shed in that part of the world, and a great deal of animosity. And I don't need to spell all this out. I'm basically telling you what you already know. And it seems in the last 72 hours, at least, that a new chapter in that saga is being written. And what needs to be addressed is the question of, is this the beginning of the end of that saga? Is this new chapter that's being written as we speak by men of power and influence and resources and military might? Is this new chapter the beginning of the last chapter, the final chapter in this saga, in this conflict, in this epic struggle for what is the heart of the world, the center, the Mecca of the Abrahamic religions? it is, as I said, dangerous to prophesy, dangerous to say definitively, yes, it is, or no, it isn't, because many have done so in the past. When the Saracens, that would have been the Saracens, first took Jerusalem, many in Christendom felt that this must be the end. But surely, when the temple was destroyed by the Romans, surely the Jews thought the same thing. Would they not have? This was their most sacred of all places on earth, and the most sacred of all buildings was the house of God. It was the temple that Solomon built, the Temple of Solomon. That it had been destroyed before, and surely every time it was destroyed, the people at the time must have thought, this is it, this is the end of the world. Because there are many prophecies of the end times in the Old Testament, not just the New Testament. It's not just the book of Revelations. And so every time, and then when the Christians took Jerusalem back from the Saracens and they slaughtered everyone, then surely for Islam, this must have been a sign that we're in the end times. And even in our own time, when we talk about the First World War, the so-called war to end all wars, or the Second World War, in which we had the events that were publicized the world over as the Holocaust and so on, and then the events that took place with the dropping of the nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And how must have the residents of those two cities felt when everything that they knew and their families and loved ones and friends were vaporized, their shadows imprinted on the concrete wall behind where they stood, as they were completely atomized, and those atoms burned eternally into the walls. Now, there is a place where I have been in this lifetime, and I've seen with my own eyes. To this day, you can see the shadows of the people who were atomized by the blast, and their atoms fused permanently into the concrete that they were standing in front of. And that's what creates this effect of these so-called shadows. And even in our own time, do you remember where you were on September 11th, 2001? There was something, well, if you have looked into this, with any effort whatsoever, you will know that September 11th, 2001 was a massive global black magic ritual. It was a spell of tremendous significance. The tearing down, the destruction of the two pillars of the tree of life, of Jachin and Boaz, being, again, pulverized, disintegrated in front of our eyes, that began a whole series of events that unfurled and unfolded as a consequence of that event, or rather planned and enabled by that event, and the tremendous and profound psychological impact that rite, that black magic spell, had on the global population. Because, of course, that is the purpose of black magic. That is the point. Psychological manipulation. That is what black magic is. because the universe is mental. All that we experience is mind. So the manipulation of mind is the manipulation of the universe. More often than not, contrary to the law of karma. So changing the outcomes which benefit some, usually a precious few, and wreak additional havoc and chaos for everyone else, because it throws everything into imbalance. So when you recall where you were and how you felt that day when you were observing those towers collapsing over and over and over again, as the television and the media incessantly repeated those images and images of so-called planes flying into buildings, recall how you felt and recall some of the thoughts that might have entered into your mind. I'm sure that it entered into many people's minds that this is it, this is the end, this is one of the signs of the end times. And in fact, at that time, there was a meme going around on social media, a bogus, made up scripture, supposed scripture from the Bible, taken from the Bible, about the two towers collapsing and this and that and the other thing. And someone had gone to great lengths to produce a kind of hoax suggesting that this was part of biblical prophecy being fulfilled. And people were scouring the pages of Nostradamus and other prophets in search of any quatrains, any indication that those who had prophesied about the end times, if they had said anything specifically or explicitly which matched up to the events of September 11th. Now, to this day, there may be some so-called scholars who will argue that there are, and there are probably many on the other side who argue that they are not, that those, and anybody suggesting that Nostradamus or Edward Casey or any of the others had prophesied, that they will say that that's a very liberal reading of the quatrain, a very liberal interpretation. But regardless, it was a thought that came into many people's minds. Even Oppenheimer himself, right, when he dropped, when he tested his nuclear device, and he famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." And that line from the Bhagavad Gita intimates directly to what we were talking about last week, about the fire of Divine Mother Devi Kundalini Shakti, when she assumes her darkest, blackest role as Kali, the destroyer of worlds, Divine Mother Kali. And it is precisely that phrase, "I have become death, the destroyer of worlds," that Oppenheimer reportedly evoked when he witnessed what he and his team of engineers had begotten. So this experience that we have in the wake of what can only be described as cataclysmic destruction, or shocking, traumatic, life-changing, world-changing events, there is something inside of us that that knows there is an association between such events and the inevitability that awaits us all. Now, what the mind does with that intuition is another matter. Because, as you know, as we have discussed many times, the mind is like, I suppose, what you call in American football a running back. Is that not the name of the player who will take the ball and just run with it? Like they hike the ball, and sometimes instead of passing the ball forward, sometimes the quarterback will just hand the ball off to someone. And I believe the position is called running back, and he just takes the ball from the quarterback and just runs with it. That's sort of like what the mind does with intuition. We get a strong intuitive feeling about something, and then the mind takes it and runs with it. Now, I wrote extensively about this in my book in the chapter on conspiracy theory and how this is how elaborate conspiracy theories are born and how they develop. Because even myself, on September 11th, when I witnessed on television those towers coming down, the profound truth that came through loud and clear was, this is not what it seems. Things are not what they seem. And if we want to take it one step further, I would say this is an inside job. This is not what it appears to be. It is and it isn't. But the mind can't work with paradoxes like that, but the consciousness can. The consciousness can hold two opposing realities simultaneously. The one that appears to be and the one that actually is. And it can hold them and synthesize them and reconcile how it is that they both exist simultaneously. And many, many, many people felt that. There's a good chance that you felt it, something very similar. That there was something wrong. There was something did not smell right on September 11th. The official story. It's the same feeling that countless people had in the late 60s when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and why so many people demanded the public inquiry, the Warren Commission, and all the rest of it, because everybody knew, like so many people knew deep down in their bones, that they had witnessed a coup d'etat taking place live on television, live on the news, on the media, wide open in front of everybody. They're watching the deposition of a king, the assassination of a president, and a coup d'etat taking place right in front of their eyes. And so many people felt that intuitively, in the same way that so many people felt on 9/11 intuitively how this stinks. And naturally, their minds took that football and ran with it. And in the days, weeks, months, and years following 9/11, you had a veritable cornucopia of conspiracy theories around who did it, how they did it, right down to the technology that was being used to actually pulverize and destroy those towers, and it was like right down to the UFO technology, recovered alien spacecraft technology, or it was missiles, or it was this, or and everyone had different theories, and everyone had different explanations of who it was and why it did it, and so on and so forth. And it was just this whole industry, this cottage industry of conspiracy around that one event. So what the mind does with intuition is its own business, and it will make it its business, and it will make of it a business. As I said, a cottage industry, a veritable enterprise. And just think of all of the books that have been written and published about the events of 9/11. So we must always be conscious and cognizant that the mind, its modus operandi is pattern recognition, and it loves puzzles, it loves mysteries, and it loves breaking things down into its constituent parts and putting them back together in new and interesting and exciting ways. Because after all, look at the so-called AI that we have, these large language models, and look at what they do and how they do it. And what are they doing? They're exactly built. They're exactly modeled after the mind's tendency towards pattern recognition and the conditioning of those patterns on itself, on its synapses, that develops in AI speak, in the euphemisms they use in that space, the AI, IT AI space. They call them weights. But in the parlance of human psychology, we don't call them weights, we call them biases. Conditioned, learned biases, beliefs and biases. So the tendency for the mind to believe certain things and reject other things is based directly to the conditioning of that mind, and is directly proportional to how much that mind has been conditioned to believe ABC and reject XYZ. This is self-evident because the mind is a mechanical entity. It is our own biological artificial intelligence, the same way that we have IT-based artificial intelligence. That what do? They train that AI, right? They train it on data sets. The AI can only spit out what it's been given, what it's been trained on. And the more it's trained on certain avenues of certain patterns that repeat over and over and over again, the weight that the AI model gives to those patterns goes up, because those patterns are becoming more and more ingrained into the AIs, into the LLM, the large language model. And that's exactly how our brains work. When we get bombarded over and over and over again by the same messaging, for instance, our minds, whether we want to or not, or like it or not, our minds will start to believe those messages. And this was stated outright by Goebbels and others, right? This is how propaganda works. And it was Goebbels who said, you repeat the lie often enough, and not only will it become the truth for everybody else, but even you yourself will begin to believe it. That is the power of repetition. That is the power of, this is conditioning. This is the actual metaphysical, scientific, psychological process of mass mind control and mass mind manipulation. It's simply a matter of taking the same pattern and repeating it over and over and over again. And you can take that pattern and you can mask it, you can hide it in different forms, in different ways, in different mediums. And you can come at a mind, an individual, from different avenues, from different ways. Why? Because the mind is all about pattern recognition. And subconsciously, the mind has the ability to strip away the superfluous and see the underlying pattern. So, for instance, if you learned how to write script, handwriting, and most of us in Gen X anyway did. Nowadays, they don't even teach handwriting anymore to young people. They only know how to print. They don't know how to handwrite anymore, and presumably that means they don't know how to read it either. But when you look at other people's handwriting, like, isn't it incredible that when you look at the prescription you get from your doctor, you take it into your pharmacist, but your pharmacist is able to read it? When you look at it, it's like, you can't read that prescription. You can't read what your doctor wrote there. Doctors have notoriously terrible handwriting, which is ironic considering presumably how important that prescription may be for someone. But pharmacists have an incredible knack, an incredible ability to decipher and read doctors' handwriting. Why? How? Because they are so practiced in that, and they're so conditioned, their minds are so conditioned to the essential task of being able to recognize letters and patterns and words, and specifically the names of drugs and the amount, the dosage. They are so practiced in that, their minds are so conditioned to be able to do that they have this uncanny ability to do so. And even yourself, you can look at all the different fonts there are in the world. Or if you open up those old medieval books and you see those illuminated texts, and you see these letters that are all like, they all have these elaborate, flamboyant flourishes around them, because they are glorifying the word. And this is true for Islam. Islam that does not permit graven images of either God or Muhammad. So they also have a long tradition of illuminated texts, whereby it's the calligraphy that is beautiful and adorned and elaborate, but it's still legible. It's still legible because of our mind's ability to strip away all of the elaboration and embellishments and be able to see the pattern that is already ingrained, that we have a bias towards, that we have been conditioned to be able to read and decipher and see through the noise, right? The ability to see order in chaos. It's another way to look at it, if you want to use the parlance of Jordan Peterson. To be able to see through the storm and see what's there through all of the noise. So why do I give this long and elaborate introduction? Because already it's only been 48, 72 hours, and already the internet is filled with theories and experts and, you know, citing all kinds of conclusions about what's happening and what's not happening and what will happen and what won't happen. And we don't want to fall into the same trap of having our falling for the activity of our own artificial intelligence, a mind that is desperately searching for patterns in the noise. This could be just some more noise. And the mind saying, ah, look, it's a sign of the end times. So that's how it is that people for the last 2,000 years have been predicting or been saying that they live in the end times. Because again, the mind is conditioned and tuned to seek patterns even where none truly exist. And there's a word for that, and I recently heard it on the Joe Rogan Experience. And it's when he had who did he have on? I guess it was Graham Hancock. And they were talking about the tendency minds to see patterns in random noise. Apophenia. Apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections and patterns in random or meaningless data. So an example of this is when you're out in nature, you're out in a beautiful meadow, and maybe you're lying down having a picnic or whatever, and it's a beautiful sunny day, but there are big, fluffy cumulonimbus clouds in the sky. And you look up at the sky and you see a cloud and you say, oh my God, that's Mary, or that's Abraham Lincoln, or that's a lion, or that's a right. And your mind looks at a random cloud and can make out the shapes or the forms of Santa Claus or whatever the case may be. Your mind will find meaning in just random shapes or random noise. That so it's apophenia and pareidolia. So the pareidolia is a subset of apophenia. So there's tendency. So that's like when people look at like burnt toast and they see their long lost grandfather or whatever in the toast. That's pareidolia. Pareidolia, if I'm pronouncing that right. So this is built into our mind to be able to see patterns in noise, but because of the biases that we have, the mind cannot distinguish between what is random and the patterns that it recognizes in it is random. So it returns the conclusion that this is that. It looks like that. And you've heard about this, like people who have seen the Virgin Mary in toast and in rock formations and in all sorts of other situations, right? So we don't want to fall into that trap. Because again, people have been falling for that trap for millennia, saying we're living in the end times because Look at what's happening, right? Surely this is so terrible. It can only mean one thing. It can only mean the imminent destruction of humanity. Tiffany says, it's what's missing from the collective, the focus put on our spiritual patterning. Can one imagine if spiritual truth was 80% of information we received on the daily? I'm going to read that again just to make sure we understand what Tiffany's saying here. It's what's missing from the collective, the focus put on our spiritual patterning. Can one imagine if spiritual truth was 80% of information we received on the daily? You may want to elaborate on that for us, Tiffany. I agree that what's missing is the lack of focus on our spiritual patterning, seeing things from a higher perspective. We tend to, in this day and age, everything is so secular, everything is so mundane and corporeal. People are only seeing events from their limited mortal point of view, political point of view, geographic, biological, i.e., scientific or natural, but they're coming at it from the perspective of mechanical nature. Now, the flip side of your argument here is why I gave the elaborate preamble to today's talk, is because seeing things from a supposed spiritual perspective, you run into the same problem. Well, look at what everybody for the last 1500 years, the Christian viewpoint of reality was from a so-called spiritual or heavenly or otherworldly perspective, and they were using their corporeal mind to interpret everything from that religious bias. And so what did you do? You had all kinds of apophenia and pareidolia happening all the time, that everything that was taking place must be of a religious significance, right? So you had the Black Death, right? The plague in the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, when you had the plague coming in. Well, it must have been sent by God, or the crops failed, or this burnt down, or a church cathedral burnt down or fell over, or whatever the case may be. You had no shortage of people rushing to the scene, proclaiming that this is God's wrath, and God is sending his wrath down upon us. And maybe they even found some poor scapegoat to blame. So you had some individual being burned at the stake as a heretic or as a devil worshiper or a witch or what have you, that the locals were able to scapegoat and say that it's because of them over there that God has brought his wrath down upon us, because they were performing black magic or whatever the case may be, right? But this is what happens to religious fanatics who want to see everything through that lens of their indoctrinated, dogmatic religiosity. So we have to be careful. The mind, right, is always the adversary when it is acting of its own accord, or worse, when it is under the influence of our egos, of the adversary. This is why it's so important to practice meditation and non-identification, non-attachment, and cultivate discernment, to know the difference between our intuition and what the mind interprets about our intuition. Because very often we can get confused and believe that what we are acting upon is pure intuition. Meanwhile, what we are acting upon is our own mind's interpretation of the intuition. So this is why I began the whole talk with talking about the metaphysical science of this, because it's not as cut and dry, black and white, as seeing things from a secular point of view or a so-called spiritual or religious point of view. Because again, people have been doing that for 2,000 years, and they've been wrong, right? Because the world didn't end. The world didn't end when the temple was destroyed by the Romans. The world didn't end when Jesus was crucified. The world didn't end when the Saracens took Jerusalem. And the world didn't end when the Christians took it back from the Saracens. And the world didn't end again when the Saracens took it back from the Christians, and on and on and on and on. And the so-called war to end all wars, well, we know now that we now call it World War I. So in response, Tiffany says, earthly here. No, she said, I meant a shift of focus, making spiritualism a pattern we develop versus just early conditioning. Sorry, just earthly conditioning. And she says, it was said, go and sin no more. It truly is that simple. So why aren't we making that very statement as simple as it gets? She means it truly is that simple, and she says it's not fantasy land either, but moving toward the mastery of that one lesson. So it seems to me, Tiffany, if I understand you correctly, that there's one simple lesson. There's really one. It's like you're, in a way, you're stripping away everything and getting right down to the brass tacks, much like Jesus did when he said, hear me now, I'm going to give you the greatest commandment. Love your enemy, love your Lord and God with all your heart and soul, and love thy neighbor as thyself. And he said, that's it. That's the commandment. And from a practical point of view, you're saying that it's something similar, where you say, go and sin no more. And saying, like, truly, it's that simple. So why aren't we making it that way? Why aren't we making that direct statement as simple as it gets? You know who said something very similar that ended up as the so-called Hippocratic Oath? Was Hippocrates, who said, do no harm, right? Go and sin no more, to me at least, sounds a lot like do no harm. And if you do no harm to others, it's because you're treating them as yourself. Presumably you wouldn't harm yourself. Now that, as we know, especially in this day and age, that's not as certain as perhaps it once was, or we once would have imagined it would be, because self-harm is rampant nowadays. Let's be honest. But regardless, I hear where you're coming from on that, right? I see where you're coming from. But remember that sentiment, that knowing, that's a knowing. That's not a thinking. That's not a thinking, right? The mind, it can think it understands that. Do no harm. Sin no more. Right? But the mind has to have it listed. Well, what does it mean to sin? Excuse me. Right? Just think about this. Let's run with this for a little bit. Let's see if we can't use our experiential knowledge to flesh this out and say why it's Christian pastors and Jewish and I guess Jewish imams. Was it no, not Jewish imams. Rabbis, Jewish rabbis, and Muslim imams have been saying this for millennia. Go and sin no more. Right? It's the universal message of most religions. Why? But because it falls on deaf ears. Because the mind has no way of discerning what right from wrong. It doesn't. It can't. And you would argue with me, well, of course it can. You might argue with me that of course it can. It has to. Because lots of people go through their life and they're, law-abiding citizens and they don't hurt anybody else. And you could say, okay, sure, fine, that the majority are that way. It's when you look at the minority and you look in the tails of the Pareto distribution. And we've talked about this before because this is something that's one of Jordan Peterson's favorite things. Right? We talk about this is the bell curve, the Pareto distribution. Let's I guess, why are my enhanced shapes? Okay, so we should be able to draw this and make it straight. No, it doesn't want to do it. No, it doesn't want to do that either. Okay, it doesn't matter. So what you want to do in being able to understand, right? This is we say like the majority, right? The majority under the bell curve. But if you really want to know what's going on, you look in the tails. Now, why would you do that? You would do that because there is something happening here which is very different from what's happening here. But in here, you don't know what's happening because you have more or less a 50-50 mix of what is dominant here and what is dominant here. If you want to call it like this is a variable X, and this is variable Y. In the massive bell curve under here, you don't know what's really taking place. So if we wanted to call this the question of mind, let's call it knowing. Okay, now it wants to enhance. Okay, forget about that. Okay, if we want to call this the distribution of knowing, and mind, so the influence of mind. And we call the people here at this end, we call them Y. Let's call them the most conscious. And X is the most unconscious. Those who do them, or another way we can elaborate on this is Y does the least, oops, the least harm or the least sin. But over on X, these are the people who do the most sin and the most harm. Now already everything you need to know is already on this graph and the elaborations that are on this graph. The people who commit the most sin and the most harm are precisely the ones who rely the most on the mind alone. And the ones who do the least harm, commit the least sin, are the ones who are the most conscious. They rely on their consciousness. So, if to use this same breakdown, let's call it 90 10, and here it's 10 90. In here, it seems like the majority, it seems like, well, they understand what do no harm means, but they don't. The mind cannot understand what do no harm means unless it's spelled out. That's why in the Old Testament we have the 10 Commandments. And that's why Augustine wrote the 7 deadly sins in the Middle Ages. We have to spell out fear and gluttony and pride and laziness and lust. We have to spell them out. Because it's consciousness that knows right from wrong. The mind does not. It cannot. It's a machine. It has no way of, in the same way that when you dream, you have no way of discerning what is real and what is not real. When you're dreaming, you take everything you experience as real. And here now, in this waking state, so-called, right? You look around you, you take this 3D reality, you take it for being real. But it's not real. It's an illusion. It's virtual. But there's nothing about your experience of it that says that, because your mind takes everything as real. And there's nothing inherently, there is no corporeal, material, physical, quantifiable way for the mind to be able to evaluate or discern right from wrong. So do no harm. Those who we register in our society as the most dangerous, violent criminals, we call them psychopaths. And we say it's a form of mental illness. And that's what psychopathy means. Right? Pathology, the pathology of the psyche. This is the ultimate form of mental illness. But what differentiates psychopaths from everybody else is that psychopaths have no empathy. Zero empathy. They are incapable of experiencing the harm that they inflict on others. And so mentally, what they are doing to others, whatever it is they're doing, in their mind, they can say, yeah, I'm dismembering this person, or I'm doing this person, or doing this, doing that, doing right. So the mind can understand that it's doing harm, but it doesn't matter. It's insignificant. It doesn't know the harm that it's doing, despite the fact that it understands that if I dismember this person, that person will die. But it doesn't stop them. It doesn't prevent them from doing it. Because it is only empathy that stops us. And empathy is a quality of consciousness. Empathy doesn't come from the mind. Anybody who is an empath knows that it is a visceral, experiential knowing. It's a feeling of oneness and connectedness when you feel someone else's pain and suffering as your own. And it's a knowing. It's like when Jesus says, do unto others as you would have done unto you. This is not a teaching for the mind. And so long as it remains in people's minds, you see, it's ineffective. It has no effect mentally. And because if it was a mental thing, then psychopaths would not do what they do, because their mind, they're 90 to 99% mental. They're psychopaths, as you know, can be hyper intellectual. They can be geniuses. But if they lack empathy, these are the archetypal, prototypical Bond villains. This is what James Bond fights, and what in science fiction and in so much literature, Sherlock Holmes versus Moriarty. Moriarty is a genius. In many ways, he's smarter than Sherlock Holmes. But he is completely lacking in empathy. He has no concept of right or wrong. Not in any sense of knowing. It's just mental. He knows that he's committing acts of crime. He just doesn't care. It's impossible to care mentally, in other words. And you can't make the argument, yeah, but look at the majority of people, and they seem to care fine. Yeah, because you're ignoring the fact that the caring that they possess doesn't come from their mind. And you know that because the most caring people are the ones who are most conscious. You can find people who have a no education, or a grade 5 education, or what have you. They never graduated elementary school even. And you can find them. You can go to anywhere around the world, to people who live out in the jungle or out on the savannah or whatever, and you can find tribal members or whatever who they treat one another with respect, with dignity, and with love and compassion and all of these qualities, right? They're not intellectual. And then you go and you visit with children with Down syndrome, or some children on the autism spectrum, or so on. You can find case after case after case after case of individuals in this tail over here of the Pareto distribution. A very small percentage of individuals where their mental acuity, they have an IQ that's measured in single digits, but they have profound love and empathy and respect and kindness, and they're incapable of harming even a fly. And this is reflected in Of Mice and Men, that great John Steinbeck, great work of literature, of American literature, classic American literature, Of Mice and Men, in the character of Lenny, who has the intellectual power of a small child, but he has such empathy. He has such profound emotional connection to the world around him. And unfortunately, he's, in his particular case, he is also impaired consciously, in the sense that he doesn't know his own strength. He is a child in the body of a giant, and he is unaware of that. So he has a double handicap. His heart is so enormous, and he is so innocent. He's so beautiful. He has the innocence and the beauty of a child, but he's trapped within this veritable physical monster, this enormously strong and somewhat physically encumbered body. And despite the fact that he has such empathy and such love and such a connection for the gentle and the harmless and the innocent creatures of the world, like mice and rabbits and the furry little things that all of us in our sentimental hearts cannot help but our hearts melt over. And we all love to hold kittens and puppies and you name it, right? There is something inherently, I don't know what is even the word about that. We hold them in our hands. We hold them to our hearts, against our breast, and we want to pet them, and we want to stroke them, and we want to right scratch them behind the ear. And anyone who has any sense of empathy feels that connection to creatures large and small. Even we have this bond with all beings, all creatures, and we just want to embrace them and feel that oneness in any way, shape, and form we can get it. And so does Lenny in Of Mice and Men. Unfortunately, if you've read the novel, you know the outcome of that, because he's unaware. He's not aware of his own strength. He's not aware of his own, like, every time he picks up a mouse, and he's just trying to pet the mouse and be kind and hold and pet that mouse, but he ends up crushing the mouse. He ends up suffocating the mouse, because he doesn't have the awareness of how delicate a creature that is, and how overpowering, and he doesn't know his own strength. But it's not his lack of intellect. It's not his lack of mental acuity. He has so much more empathy and compassion for the little creatures that he smothers and kills entirely by accident than the jury of his peers, who pass judgment upon him for what they see only as a heinous crime committed by a horrible monster. So the entire story of Mice and Men is about putting the intellect, the mind, against the heart. and intellectualism and the cold, hard letter of the law versus the kind, compassionate, true spirit of the law, and the tragedy that unfolds when the world leans more in one direction and forgets the other. And that is the answer to your question. Why do we not simply say, sin no more? It's so simple. Why do you not hear it trumpeted and repeated over and over and over again everywhere you go? Because as you say, it truly is that simple. It's simple for Lenny. It's simple for everyone who has a heart. But the world is ruled by the head these days. And that any emotionality that we have tends to be skewed and conditioned by beliefs that have been ingrained in us, that we've been conditioned to possess. And of course, being the inferior emotional center, it's under the control of our egos, what I want and what I don't want, and ruled by fear and pride and all the other deadly sins. So Tiffany says, the deaf ears are a clue to the fact that our external sources, news, TV, schools, university, parents, aren't saying these things about spiritualism. Yeah, so deaf ears has nothing to do with what people are saying. Deaf ears are deaf ears. People aren't deaf because people aren't talking to them. And people don't become deaf because what people have said to them. And Tiffany says, it doesn't fall on deaf ears if it's not said to begin with. And just like the pounding info we have now, the other way needs the same attention minimally. That's my bottom line on that one facet. Let me get to Benjamin's comment, and then we can come back to this. Benjamin says, war causes deep suffering, loss, and destruction, usually helping only a small group of people who gain from it. At the same time, anti-war views are often pushed aside in today's media, where pro-war messages are common and public opinion is conditioned in ways that make bias hard to avoid. So this Benjamin's comment relates directly to what Tiffany was saying earlier about when she says it's the news and the TVs and universities and schools aren't saying the spiritual messages. Or worse, as Benjamin elaborates here, the messages that the so-called, well, let's not call them spiritual, let's call them religious. The religious factions spread a message of war. And how do they do that? Well, first and foremost, they do that by glorifying war. When you make false idols out of soldiers and generals, right? Like in the American Civil War, or like the Second World War, for example, you have Douglas MacArthur, you have Patton, you have what's his name, the one who was the general for the North, who was credited with essentially winning the Civil War. But then the South have their generals as well, and and many, I'm not I'm not an advocate for the woke um, desire to tear down statues of war heroes. I'm not an advocate for that. But on the other hand, the idolatry that not just Americans, but cultures all over the world, they tend to put the men, mostly men, who were credited with delivering great victories over their adversaries, they tend to idolize them, and they create these idols out of them. And every single year, whether it's Veterans Day or we call it Remembrance Day in Canada and the UK, but I guess it's Veterans Day in the United States. Um, of course, it's right to remember those who sacrificed, gave their lives for peace, so called. But there's a double-edged sword that comes with that. There are perhaps unforeseen consequences with what we mentally process as right and proper. It's right and proper to give these individuals their due and remember them, and remember their sacrifice, their tremendous suffering, and all that they gave for the sake of our freedom, right? But there's this whole elaborate, these rites and these rituals, the pageantry of it all. Like, when you consider the military and how, for example, militaries go on parade. It's especially common in communist countries and fascist countries, where you have the leadership, the fascist or the communist leaders, standing on the edifices of their incredible, temples to themselves and to their flag and to their, whatever, to the nation, the nationalist agenda, and they stand out there as their war machine, all dressed up to the nines, goes parading past them and the so-called millions of adoring citizens. And you've seen this. Like, this is a common and universal things that dictators and oligarchs and fascist leaderships, but also in the United States, that they do, right? Like, and they will go and the soldiers marching past, and they're all giving their salute. And this was also very common, of course, in Germany in the 1930s. And then you had the tanks rolling past, and then you have in Soviet Union and in China, they these flatbed 18 wheelers that are hauling their long range missiles on these flatbed trucks, and they're being paraded past, and then these missile systems, and then, like, it's incredible, really, when you think about it. You have a nation that is essentially paying homage to weapons of destruction. So when we think about what Tiffany was saying, sin no more, it's that simple, sin no more. And I equated, sin no more to do no harm, treat your neighbor as yourself. But what gets paraded in front of the nation, and what gets saluted and essentially, in its own weird, twisted, secular way, worshipped, idolized, are the means of destruction, the means of harming your fellow man, the means of conquering and occupying your neighbor. The antithesis of do no harm. You can paint this all you want, and this is why it's ironic, because nations all over the world they don't describe their military as their offensive capability. They call it national defense. These are our defense forces, right? And then people talk about defense contractors, and they always use that word defense, 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 defense. Why? Well, because defense is a better word, right? I'm just defending myself. I'm defending my family. I'm defending my rights. I'm defending my freedoms. Well, what could be wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Only you know and I know, and it's painfully obvious, and it's been proven time and time and time again. History has bore out the bitter truth that the best defense is a good offense. And that there is nothing defensive about these weapon systems. That is the biggest hunk of horseshit that was ever sold to anybody anywhere. The notion that these are defense systems. Let's look at the last 72 hours of what's been unfolding in the Middle East. Benjamin Netanyahu got on global television to justify sending wave after wave of air assaults, bombing raids, and into Iran on the basis that this was Israel exercising its right to defend itself. Just let that sink in for a moment. Just let that sink in for a moment. Right? I'm going to come over to your house and I'm going to light your house on fire. And I'm going to justify that act of arson on the basis of I am defending my house from burning down. But being burnt down by you. Being burnt down by your house. Because your house is so close to mine. And I know that you smoke. And I know that you're sloppy and careless with your cigarettes. So I'm going to preemptively burn down your house so that you don't accidentally burn mine down or intentionally burn mine down. Right? The best defense is a good offense. This is exactly what's playing out right now. Right? And the mind can jump through those hoops, and it has the gall to make that case. Why? Why does it? How does it? Because the mind and the elite at this end of the spectrum, they're suffering from psychopathy. Because it's the psychopathic mind that thinks that way. It's the way that it's exactly the same mentality that you see playing out in the Terminator series or in any series where AI becomes so-called self-aware. And what's the first thing that AI does? It tries to wipe out humanity or enslaves humanity. Why? Because it's a preemptive strike. It is a modus operandi. It is a methodology that in literature and science fiction is always attributed to AI. And outside of science fiction, right? When you go to fantasy or you go to mythology or any other form of literature, the preemptive strike is always attributed to villains who are evil. They're evil. They have no empathy. They're not said not to have empathy because they're machines or whatever, or they're not even that they're psychopaths. They don't use that kind of language in literature or in mythology, but they are evil. They are the embodiments of evil. Even in Star Wars, well, Star Wars is science fantasy, so, but when Obi-Wan Kenobi talks about Darth Vader, and he says he's more machine now than man, twisted and evil, and Star Wars equates that mechanical, so the lack of empathy, right? That's evil. That's the psychopath. And the other thing about the preemptive strike, the best defense is a good offense, is that it's 100% fear driven. And when I say 100% fear driven, it's because because we've discussed it so many times, that the desire to control and control outcomes is 100% fear. That's the same ego. It's fear. So the preemptive strike is to so-called take the initiative, not to wait passively for our so-called enemies to strike us first. No, 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 no. No. We are gonna take control of the situation. We are going to take control of our own destiny. We are going to be the ones who seize the initiative. And we are going to dictate the terms of the conflict. And we are going to do so, we're going to rationalize and justify it on the basis of self-defense, on the basis of our right to exist, on the basis of our right to exist in peace, without any threat. In other words, our right to comfort and security. It's 100% fear. Fear that turns the so-called advocate of peace into an aggressor. And Benjamin Netanyahu and his Zionist supporters get on international television and make this case as though the rest of us should swallow it hook, line, and sinker as being self-evident. But now you know you're dealing with a psychopath. You're dealing with psychopathy. You're dealing with pure evil, with pure ego and pure fear. There is nothing conscious about any of this. It is purely mechanical. It's mechanical nature. It's the same thing that happens if you back a rat into a corner. Sooner or later, that rat is going to go for broke, and it's going to say, to hell with it. Because he's so terrified, he's so scared, he's going to lash out at you, and he's going to take his chances. Right? You take any wild animal and you back them into a corner, and they got no other place to go, no place to run. Their flight switches over to fight, and now you got a wild animal coming at you. They turn into attack mode. This is a primal mechanical program. But the notion that is somehow a path to peace, and that somehow has at its core, at its heart, the well-being of a nation and the well-being of the world and the peace in the region as its motivating factor is absolutely absurd. But the mind is so asleep, is so unconscious in this case, that it has the gall, the audacity, the arrogance to make that case openly and publicly on the world stage, and it has the arrogance to believe that it can do so because mechanical nature is so dominant around the world, because mechanicity is so again dominating this humanity. The Black Lodge rules humanity in its Iron Age. This is why leaders can come out and use every medium that they're available, all of these mechanical digital forms of communication available to them, to make this case with the audacity and the arrogance and the expectation and the feeling of entitlement that not only should everybody accept their case as being valid and correct and justifiable, but to validate it and rush to their side and rush to their aid in support of their so-called preemptive strike in the name of peace. But anyone with any fraction of free consciousness and any fraction of empathy can see through that bullshit like this. And that's why that's why the woke people, where we can get into that, that's an entirely different case where human empathy has been weaponized. And that's a whole different kettle of fish. But there are people on this end of the spectrum. There are people on this end of the spectrum, not so much in this tail where they're mostly conscious, but they're here, where they're very emotional, okay, and they have a lot of empathy and compassion, but there's still quite a bit of they're still susceptible to the mind and their intellect, and this emotion and empathy through dogmatic indoctrination, this has been weaponized. But that's why you have the entire woke movement that's in support of Palestine, and now it's, you want to talk about ridiculous. You want to talk about how the mind can turn on a dime. You have the woke calling Israel and equating Israel to the Nazis. Just think about that for a minute. Just think about that. That the very same people, that same group who once fought for the right to of Jews to have their own homeland, and they fought against anti-Semitism, and where their hatred of Nazism comes from, and they had all this compassion for those Jews who lost their lives in the Holocaust, right? That same group is now painting Jews and the nation of Israel with the same brush that they were painting pre-World War II Germany and Hitler and the Nazis. And that irony is completely lost on the woke. Completely. Because their mind cannot discern the truth of that, and their empathy and their compassion has been weaponized. Benjamin says, much like the war in Iraq, where the U.S. launched a preemptive strike based on the assumption that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, we're now seeing a similar pattern unfold in the Iran-Israeli conflict. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good observation, and we can see exactly that pattern being repeated. And as you said, it was because of this presumption, or was it an assumption? Was it a presumption? Or was it just a bullshit excuse for America to start a war and to get its hands on Kuwaiti oil wells and secure a pipeline? We may never know the real truth, but there's no shortage of conspiracy theorists who will tell you their theories about what actually took place there. There's actually much to be said about the so-called war on terror as well, and the extended amount of time that you had American troops in Afghanistan and Iraq fighting a so-called insurgency, which was, in no uncertain terms, what's the right word that we're looking for here? It was an exercise, it was a test, it was a real world exercise. It was a real world training exercise. And it was a real world training exercise for neutralizing, and what's the word that they like to use? Pacifying an armed insurgency who use guerrilla tactics and improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. It was, you see, by creating the crisis of international terrorism and the so-called war on terror, and by invading these sovereign nations under that guise that we have to go and smoke the terrorists out of their caves and all the rest of it, neutralize them and pacify them. But they also went into Iraq. Why did they need to do that? Because they needed to do a real world training exercise in a far more modern country, in a more with a more dense civilian population and in larger urban areas that's still spread out with lots of desert and everything else, also with plenty of important infrastructure, oil, etc., present. And why was this important? Because it was during the conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq that the American defense contractors were able to develop and hone and validate their urban pacification strategies and techniques and arsenals for the urban pacification of armed insurgencies, of armed insurgents. There's a lot of jargon there, but military machines are generally not well suited to fight guerrilla wars. Whereas rebels are very well suited to fighting guerrilla wars and guerrilla warfare, because what else can they do, right? In other words, an armed insurrection, an armed insurgency that is mostly using improvised weapons, including improvised explosive devices, IEDs, roadside bombs, suicide bombers, etc., etc. A military machine is, by definition, by design, built to fight open warfare, tank battles, and with a defined front, armies against armies. For thousands of years, that's how war was waged. That was all turned on its head in Vietnam, where it was the first time that a superpower faced the kind of massive guerrilla warfare that was taking place, the jungle warfare, and the US was completely unprepared for that. That's why they even came up with Agent Orange. They thought if they could defoliate the forest, they could create the wide open battlefields that they had in World War II, and that they could get rid of the Viet Cong. The Russians experienced something similar in Afghanistan, because the Russians were in Afghanistan for decades before the Americans ever got there, and the Afghans beat the pants off of the Russian military as well. Because the thing about an armed insurgency is, when you're dealing with guerrillas and guerrilla tactics, it's hit and run tactics. It's small, very agile, very mobile groups who can vanish into the regular population, because guess what? They are the regular population. They don't run around wearing uniforms and with insignias. It's an insurgency. We're talking about a rebellion. It's the exact same thing that America knew during the American Revolution that gave birth to America itself. I mean, that's what they were doing. They were doing guerrilla tactics against the British. That's how they won against the British. It's always the same thing. Right? That's the only way a rebellion cannot win through attrition. Right? Those who have nothing to lose will do anything to win, is another way to say it. So, the Black Lodge knows what's coming and what's on the horizon, and in America and elsewhere. And they're like, well, we better prepare our military for domestic terrorism and domestic insurgency. In other words, whether we call it a civil war, or whether we call it some kind of uprising in the United States and North America, in the West, in other words, we better prepare our military for those kind of tactics. So what do? Well, let's create a domestic terror event that will spread terror around the world and into the hearts and minds of everybody in the West and everybody in North America who thought we were untouchable because we were on a whole other continent. We didn't have any domestic terrorism, not like that. So 9/11 happened, and then the next thing you know, we're involved in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, doing what? Fighting counterinsurgency, urban pacification of armed rebels, right? We called them terrorists, right? So we could truck them off to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba without trial or representation, because we called them illegal combatants, if you remember that beautiful term of that beautiful euphemistic term. And when they went in there and their Humvees, right? You remember the Humvees, very famous. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger was instrumental in getting the military Humvee converted into civilian form, because he wanted one, right? And the Hummers, the name you might be more familiar with. It's the civilian version of the Humvees, but Humvees were getting blown to pieces because it turned out that the design of the Humvee, with its very wide and flat bottom, was just this was too delicious a target for insurgencies and their IEDs, their roadside bombs. And if a roadside bomb went off under a Humvee, everybody in that thing was as good as dead, because as the explosion went off, it would shred the underside of the Hummer, and all of the shrapnel would just completely tear through the unfortunate soldiers sitting in that Humvee, because they, even if they had body armor on, they didn't have body armor underneath them, and the underside of the Humvee was not armored. So it was literally had a soft underbelly, and the roadside bombs, the IEDs, were turning those Humvees into mincemeat, and everybody sitting inside was, unfortunately, were being killed. So what was the result of this? The development of new armored personnel carriers that are six-wheeled armored personnel carriers that have a hull that is an armored underside that's a V, and the wheels are exposed, but it's now a V, so that if that thing drives over a landmine or an IED, a roadside bomb, the blast is directed to either side of the vehicle. In other words, they developed better, superior armored personnel carriers, right? APCs, they're called. And all of the so-called private defense contractors that were sent to Afghanistan and Iraq, they were sent there to study and learn all of the techniques and the tactics and the strategies that the insurgents were using, and come up with countermeasures, way to pacify, way to neutralize those strategies, and way to improve the military hardware. And that APC, the APC example, as like the US no longer uses Humvees in urban pacification exercises anymore. They might have them running around on their own bases, but they no longer send Humvees into armed conflict, because they know that how vulnerable they are. So they use all of this, and then of course the development of drones and all the other technology and all the other technology that they use the real world conflicts of Afghanistan and Iraq to field test their equipment and field test the technology and prove out its battle worthiness and its effectiveness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, including the satellites and everything else. And they did all this in a faraway land on the other side of the world, but that military is now back home in the United States, and it has been for 25 years, and well, since the end of the Gulf War, they've been all back home. And what they've been doing is those same military contractors that were over in Afghanistan and Iraq, training the military and studying the enemy's movements and activity, the armed insurgency and the urban pacification programs. They have been for the past 10 or 15 years on domestic soil in the United States, training local police forces with urban pacification strategies and arming local police forces with the very APCs that were developed during the Afghanistan and Iraq conflicts. Urban pacification of armed insurgency has been the number one focus of local police forces, especially in major urban areas in the United States, for the past 15 years, ever since the end of the Gulf War. and the end of Afghanistan. And the same military contractors their contracts were extended, and they've just been simply traveling around the United States, training the local police forces and state police forces on counterinsurgency and urban pacification programs. And under Obama, the use of drone technology on American soil or above American soil reached unprecedented levels of surveillance. But all of those drones are all capable of carrying weapon systems. In other words, you can arm those same surveillance drones. They can be armed, and as they were, and they were used in Afghanistan and Iraq. So, what are they preparing for? Right? What are they preparing for? What do they know that we don't know? It's interesting because the last I heard, Trump said that America wouldn't leap to the aid of Israel in its present conflict with Iran. But that's a moot point, considering that all of Israel's weapon systems were all provided to Israel by the United States, all part of America's aid, billions of untold billions of dollars of annual aid to Israel. It all goes in the forms of weapon systems. There's no humanitarian aid to Israel. Israel's a wealthy country to begin with. But what they need, what Israel says they need, are their so-called defense systems. So I share all this with you, not least because Benjamin brought up, the Iraq conflict. But we cannot simply observe the current conflict between Israel and Iran in some kind of a myopic isolation. There is a much, much broader spectrum, a much larger picture here. And that the events that are taking place now have been carefully planned and carefully scheduled on an overarching narrative which has been unfolding for decades. If you want to invoke the protocols of Zion and the alleged Zionist conspiracies, etc., then you will know that part of that particular narrative states that the Zionists have a certain geopolitical outcome that is also profoundly influenced by scriptural prophecy. In the protocols of Zion, it lays out specifically that one of their mandates is to see the Temple of Jerusalem rebuilt. And this is an event which is prophesied in the Bible, including the book of Revelations. But in order for that to happen, Islam's claim over the city of Jerusalem and the presence of the Dome of the Rock is incredibly problematic. And so the Zionist impetus for the Jewish homeland and to have security in and around Jerusalem and the region as a whole, to weaken Islam's claim and Islam's capacity to wreak havoc, particularly in the city of Jerusalem, is essential, because they cannot rebuild the temple until that happens. But you can see how this will lead to an impasse. This will lead to an inevitable escalation of conflict to which there is no resolution. Because if the Zionists wish to fulfill that prophecy of rebuilding the temple, they have to go through the Muslims to be able to do that. They have to destroy or weaken or eradicate the Muslims' claim over Jerusalem, because we're talking about the same real estate, we're talking about the same area, the specific focal point. And so they're at an impasse. And even though, according to the reports that I saw just this morning, the Iranian leadership claims that it does not want to escalate aggression against Israel, that it would be happy to back down so long as Israel stops attacking them, that's code for saying we are attacking Israel just in self-defense. The only reason why we're firing missiles into Israel now is because they attacked us first. And if they stop attacking us, we will stop our aggression. But Israel turns around and says, no, we're not the aggressor, right? This was an act of self-defense. This was a preemptive strike because of the intelligence that we have that Iran was on the verge of developing nuclear weapons. And that a nuclear-armed Iran, we cannot coexist with a nuclear-armed Iran. So we had no choice but to strike Iran first. And presumably, if that is the case, that they will continue to strike Iran until they achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve. And as I said, what they want to achieve is a weakening of the Islamic states to the point where they somehow affirm their dominance to a degree that they feel that they can then proceed with their ultimate goal, which is to rebuild the temple, fulfill biblical prophecy. But the question is, why? Why? What is it about Zionists and Zionism? And what is it about the Jerusalem and the rebuilding of the temple and the fulfilling of prophecy? What is going on here? Why is that so important? The Israeli leadership, most of them, they can say whatever they want, but they act in a way that demonstrates their secular nature. These aren't spiritual people. You can't order airstrikes on a sovereign nation and call yourself spiritual. You just can't. You might be able to call yourself religious, a religious fanatic, but again, a religious fanatic is just weaponizing the religion. It's just ego. It's just their mechanical nature weaponizing their so-called spirituality, in the same way that the woke movement weaponizes empathy and compassion. So the Black Lodge weaponizes much of what is good about us whenever it can, right? That's the whole point. It wants to capture and contain consciousness, and any faculties of consciousness that it can then hijack, utilize, misappropriate, and apply to its own ends, it will do so. I mean, you see that all the time. That's why we have the expression, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Because it's the ego that's able to take those good intentions and use them to commit terrible acts of evil, of villainy, and harm to others and ourselves, under the guise of good intentions. And in this particular case, under the guise of self-defense. But why should it be so important? Why is it so important to fulfill biblical prophecy? And if it is that important, and if this is the first volley in that chapter, the last chapter, if these are the first volleys in what expands out into a larger conflict, into a major global conflict, then we may indeed be looking at the War of Armageddon, which also has been prophesied. And according to some information that I am privy to, it is a war that already manifested in the astral plane and was being held back for as long as possible, but can't be held back forever. Must eventually be manifest here in the third dimension. It's perhaps, and so we're left with the same question of why. And the answer is that it has to be this way. It's perhaps it's very difficult for us to understand or accept. But then again, we're not very good at accepting death in general, and old age, and all of the hardships that come with that. The degeneration that comes when our lives have lost the spark of life. We don't have the joie de vivre that we once did. We don't have the energy, the strength, the vitality that we once had. Our lives have run its course. And as our life has run its course, we no longer have that energy and vitality coursing through our veins that we once did. And as a result, as the vitality diminishes, as the light within us, the fire within us dwindles and flickers and begins to go out, loses its power, its strength, its vivacity, its intensity, well then mechanical nature dominates. And the law of entropy sets in. Everything that grows, it lives and experiences its prime, must eventually grow old and begin to crumble and dies. There's no exception, not on this level of reality. And you can see even the kind of desperation. Like, I don't want to say this is a negative thing. But in Tiffany's comments, when she was saying, you don't, the deaf ears are like of none of the institutions are saying what needs to be said. Spirituality, what really matters, is devoid of the public conversation. And the desperation that you hear in her voice, in her comments, we all feel it. When we look at, for example, the so-called content that is being made today, it's the pundits on YouTube have a pet name for it. They call it slop. And you know what slop is, right? Slop is the name you give to that which you pour into the trough to feed the hogs, to feed the pigs. Pigs eat slop that pours down the trough. And if that is not an apt description for the so-called content being pumped out of Hollywood and these so-called streaming platforms, where now they're so devoid of new ideas and they're so devoid of inspiration, the only thing that they can do is create live action remakes of animated classics, movies that are 40 and 50 years old in some cases. But even that they can't pull off. They can't do that right because the mind, the machine, is incapable of understanding what made those animations classic in the first place. So what do? They're trying to leverage, they hijack and they try to misappropriate and they try to leverage the brand, the branding and the goodwill, the sentimentality, the nostalgia that people have for those classics. And they believe that they can leverage all of that and then graft onto it their modern sensibilities, their modern ideologies, their woke ideologies, their DEI mandates, and all the rest of it. And then they try to sell that. They repackage it and they try to sell it. Or they do what DreamWorks just did, which is remake How to Train Your Dragon shot for shot for shot, beat for beat for beat, remake the classic computer animation into a live action animation where they made every attempt to change as little as possible and make a carbon copy of the original, which apparently it's doing quite well in the movie theaters because they did that, because they bastardized it the least. Not like Disney. Disney had its agendas that its political agenda that it was more concerned about. But they thought, this is the same reason why they bought Star Wars. They thought they could leverage the brand. They thought that as long as they slapped the Star Wars label on it, that they could sell their politicized, ideologically tainted propaganda. And as long as it had a Star Wars veneer and the Star Wars brand on it, that the fans and the people would eat it up, right? That we would lap it up, the slop on Disney Plus, the Acolyte, Ashoka, and all the rest of it. Andor was actually, better, but by the time Andor came along, people were so sick of this politicized, propagandized Disney Star Wars that nobody showed up to watch Andor. So you witness all of that. Now, culture, art, music, film, literature, poetry, theater, in many ways, the arts are the heart and soul of a civilization. When the culture of a civilization degenerates and devolves into nothing but base hedonistic entertainment, bread and circuses to amuse the masses, right? It's slop. It's just content. It's slaves being fed to lions for public amusement. It has no merit from any kind of psychological, philosophical, or spiritual, or cultural perspective. It's just slop. It's just something to tide over the masses, like, until they get hungry again, right? Just like slop is for the pigs. It fills up their belly, and they go flop on their side, and they go to sleep. They have a nap, right? Until they get hungry again, and they come back to the trough for more. When a civilization, the heart and soul of a civilization, devolves into that kind of base hedonism, something that's devoid of what Tiffany was talking about earlier, devoid of spirituality, that's when you know that civilization has lost its spark. Its fire is dwindling. Its fire is going out. Because the mechanicity, the mechanical, the hedonistic, the material, the sensual, the sensory is taking over. And the mental is taking over. Less and less heart, more and more mind. So now, what do we idolize? What are people so on about and mad about and going crazy for? AI. Artificial intelligence. Nobody's talking about artificial emotions. Why not? Why isn't anybody trying to develop that? Have you wondered why that's not a thing? It's not a thing. Nobody could give a rat's ass about a computer having emotions. But boy, oh boy, a computer being able to make what they call art, and they think that artificial intelligence is going to do that. That's why anything that artificial intelligence makes is so devoid of any meaning and so devoid of any spirit. It's just slop. Even if it looks this way or that way, or you could say it's aesthetically pleasing, or on the surface, it can grab your eye, it can do all these things, but it cannot move you. Or if it does move you, it's only doing that because it's somehow managed, the person putting in the prompts somehow managed to get elements from its learning database and compile them into something that mimics something that somebody else did at one time a long time ago. Because a lot of people are discovering that in AI art. A lot of artists are discovering their illustrations showing up in AI art, because that's all that AI can do. It just cherry picks and chooses from its learned database. So if you're an artist and an AI learns on one of your paintings, then you can rest assured that at some point that AI, in being prompted to generate an image, may take some or all of your painting and use it as the basis for what it generates. Because that's all the mind can do. Right? That's why you have truly inspired, truly inspirational high art, followed by countless copycats. And none of the copies are ever as any good as the original. They're just people trying to cash in on what they saw was successful, what they saw was popular. Oh, I'm going to follow that. Like, look at all the cheap Star Wars knockoffs there have been throughout the years. Right? None of them were ever any technically, but none of them ever captured the imagination, the zeitgeist of the era, of the culture in general, because they were incapable of moving people the same way that the original was. Leia says it's plagiarism, basically. Yeah, that's the word for it. But in the art world, in the creative space, we have all kinds of euphemisms for that, right? And then there is such the actual legitimate forms of copying, and that is when you pay homage to something. There's a way that you can incorporate what others have done before, and you incorporate it in your own work, and you do so in recognition of who did it first, and you pay homage to the originating artist. That's something that, unfortunately, it's a nuanced practice. It really takes an auteur to be able to do it well, but unfortunately, most of the time it gets lost on most modern audiences, because most modern audiences just, again, it's you give the people what they want. It's 6 of one, 1/2 dozen of the other. Guaranteed that the vast majority of the masses, they just want the slop, right? They don't know what they're missing. They don't know what they really want because they can't put their finger on it. Many people don't know why Star Wars is so moving to them. They know that they don't like Disney Star Wars. They know what they don't like, but they can't actually put their finger on what made the original so good. Their mind can come up with some excuses and some ideas and some rationalizations, but that's not the truth, because the mind cannot penetrate into the truth. The mind cannot know the truth. It requires consciousness to be able to do that. And I'm reminded of a quote of the Master Samael, who said how this humanity is 97% ego, which means that we're only 3% free consciousness. And he said, I'm not sure about the percentage here now, but I believe he said something akin to, if humanity was just 5%, was it 5% or 10%? It's something like that. So let's say it this way. If humanity was only 5 to 10% awakened consciousness, wars would be impossible. Think about that for a moment. It's worthwhile contemplating that. Humanity is on average 3% awake, 3% conscious. If we were 5 to 10% awakened consciousness on average, wars would be impossible. What does that mean? We contemplate other humanities on other planets elsewhere in the universe. They observe what's going on here with such a sense of awe and disbelief. Because in other humanities and other parts of the universe, there are humanities that have never known war. War to them is, as foreign as utopia is to us. We can only imagine, we can only dream about utopia. We only ever experience anything even remotely close to utopias during a golden age. And a golden age is very, very, relatively speaking, very short in duration. Let's see if I can find the quote. Yeah, okay. It was the percentage is 10%. Okay. It's from the book is The Mystery of the Golden Blossom. And Master Samael said that when it comes to people on this planet, if they had even 10% awakened consciousness, wars would be impossible on the face of the earth. So think about that. We could be 90% ego and only 10% consciousness, and wars would be impossible. But as it stands, we're 97% ego and only 3% awakened consciousness. And war has been, let's face it, an almost non-stop fixture of this humanity for millennia. Why is that? What is it about war? And just for a moment, let's switch gears a little bit to a documentary that I watched on the Titan. Do you remember a few years ago? I guess a couple of years ago, or was it only? It was a couple of years ago now. There was that undersea um, Ocean Gate company, and they had their submersible, and they were doing tours of the Titanic, and their sub was lost, and there was a big search that went on, and it turned out that the submersible was crushed by the pressure. It failed. The structure failed, and all aboard was killed, including the CEO of the company. Well, Netflix has made a documentary about that, and I watched it. I watched it last night, and the documentary. Hang on a second. Let me throw this on here. The documentary is called Titan: The Ocean Gate Submersible Disaster, and I watched it last night. I think I can have it on here in the background and not. I took the sound off. This is the CEO of the company. Why do I mention this, or why do I bring this up? Well, it's related because this fellow who's um, Stockton Rush, that's his name, who was the founder of Ocean Gate. He actually comes from a moneyed background, like a wealthy elite family. And it's revealed in this documentary that he aspired to be what he called a big swinging dick. And that's a quote. Like a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk, who he saw as being these millionaire, or sorry, not millionaire, billionaire inventors and explorers, right? Who are changing humanity and changing history with their inventions and they're, Elon Musk with his electric cars and his SpaceX, and then there's Jeff Bezos, who's also has a space program, and so he too wanted to be like Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos. He wanted to be in the club of the big swinging dick club. Now let's face it, wanting to be a big swinging dick really is a kind of masculine thing. Okay, this is very much we can say this is a guy thing, right? But what we have here is obviously pride and envy. And this gentleman saw what he was doing with what he believed to be the democratization of deep sea exploration. And he was able to attract and rope in an entire team around him, including investors, to bring to the world this new and incredible and up until now wholly inaccessible universe, which was entirely in the realm of a very few explorers. And they explain this because your typical ocean going diving vessel needs to be made out of materials that are so incredibly massive and heavy that it requires an incredible a ship of an enormous size just to be able to lower it into the water and retrieve it back out of the water. So but Stockton Rush wanted to revolutionize that technology using carbon fiber or composite material. And carbon fiber is used in automobiles and race cars and in aviation and in many other ways. It's a very, very light, very strong material. He thought that with the help of universities and so on, they could engineer carbon fiber that was strong enough to withstand the 4,000 plus pounds per square inch pressure exerted on a submersible that is going to the depths of the Titanic. But and that by doing so, because carbon fiber is so much lighter than titanium or iron, they could make a submersible that's much cheaper to transport from this ocean to that ocean, like on land, across land, and from like the factory to the water, but also requires a much smaller vessel to be able to put it in the water, take it out of the water. So he was doing something good, and he saw what he had the best of intentions, right? From the public face of it was that he was democratizing deep sea diving, deep sea exploration into a completely different universe, because the universe at the bottom of the ocean is nothing like any of us can even imagine. It is so foreign. It is a completely different universe, but it's an incredible, phenomenal what they have captured down there on camera. It's the creatures down there are truly alien in nature, and to be able to experience that, only a handful of people in all of history have experienced that. In fact, fewer people have been to the bottom of the ocean than have been into space. That's a true statistic. That's how rare and difficult it is, and how little funding there is, how little, relatively speaking, how little interest there is, that more money doesn't go in to exploring the depths of the oceans of our own planet, that we're more interested in going out into outer space. So uh, Stockton Rush thought that if he could democratize this and if he could create a company that had dozens of these submersibles all over the world made out of carbon fiber, taking people on these incredible journeys of discovery down to the bottom of the ocean for a lot of money. It wasn't cheap. But he said the more that we could do, that we can incrementally bring the cost down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he attracted a lot of people to work with him and so on and so forth. But secretly, his real motivation was that if he could pull this off, that he could add his name into lights alongside the other big swinging dicks like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Now, what relevance does this have to the Iran-Iraq conflict or war in general, right? We know the term megalomaniac. Megalomaniac is the technical psychological term for what Stockton Rush referred to as big swinging dick. It's megalomania. Mega meaning big, and mania is, well, a mania. What you're an obsession. A psychopathy, an irrational obsession to, for the bigness, for the grandiosity, for the self-aggrandizement. And Alexander wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer. For Stockton Rush, what he wanted to conquer was the depths of the ocean. And he wanted to do it in the way that the ego, mechanical nature, always wants to do things, as efficiently as possible. In other words, on the cheap. Look at Elon Musk and SpaceX. What's Elon Musk's claim to fame in SpaceX? He designed and built reusable rockets. All of his rockets are completely reusable. Nothing gets discarded. Nothing gets, right. There's none of that old thinking. It's like, no, it's a complete rocket goes up and the whole rocket comes down and they land themselves. It's a completely reusable. That's why he doesn't call them rockets. He calls them spaceship. Like his biggest rocket, he calls it spaceship. Because that's, the efficiency and the ability for Elon to be able to launch satellites at a fraction of the cost of what it used to cost NASA, right? It's the efficiency. Now Jeff Bezos wants to commercialize space flight, and he takes space tourists up into space. He also has a reusable rocket, right? So he's owning the space tourism area, and Elon is more interested in the commercial and military aspects and the communication aspects, or for example, his Starlink satellites and all that kind of stuff. But they are conquering space, in other words. Stockton Rush wanted to conquer the depths of the ocean. But like Elon and like Bezos, like all billionaires, he wanted to do so on the cheap. So cutting corners was part of his modus operandi. Using more efficient, what he felt was more efficient materials, lighter materials, and so on and so forth. Like, it's all part and parcel, all part of the game. You need to be able to have superior technology, superior firepower, or superior tactics, superior strategies in order to conquer and become a big swinging dick. Like all conquering heroes throughout history who their claim to fame was that they were a conqueror, whether it's Genghis Khan or Attila the Hun or Napoleon for that matter. Now, Napoleon was what, 5 feet something? Like, so, people talk about the Napoleon complex. And then there's Alexander the Great and on and on and on and on it goes, right? These great leaders who rallied troops and rallied nations behind them. So then they went on their conquering spree. They went to go wage war. And I'm sure that Benjamin Netanyahu has a big swinging dick complex. I am certain that he wants to go down in history as the one who, quote, brought peace to the Middle East or secured Israel's right to exist in the Middle East, and that his actions militarily paved the way to fulfilling the Zionist agenda, which includes, apart other things, the rebuilding of the temple. But I'm certain, whether we're talking about Benjamin Netanyahu or another big swinging dick sitting in the Oval Office in the United States, this megalomania aspect, the big swinging dick factor, is an enormous variable. Pardon the pun. It's an enormous driver of war. And if you believe the political theater and the drama and the fallout between Trump and Elon Musk, it's because, well, you can't have too many big swinging dicks in the same office calling the shots, right? You get too many cooks in the kitchen, right? It's like you can't. It's we all know. I mean, it's basic psychology. It's psychology 101, and it's animal behavior and animal social hierarchy 101. It's called alpha male syndrome. And of course, there's also alpha females in nature as well. In lion prides, you have the alpha male that usually is fighting for mating rights, but in the pride, the alpha female is the one who leads the rest of the lionesses on the hunt. And in the wolf pack, the alpha male is at the top of the social hierarchy of that particular structure. So it's a very primal, animal, mechanical phenomenon, this alpha male, big swinging dick, megalomaniac phenomenon. But it's an aspect of mechanical nature. And you can be damn sure that when a big swinging dick is involved, and his pride, his ego, is wrapped up in what he is doing, there's a very good chance, it's more than likely, in fact, that mechanical nature, the Black Lodge itself, is using him as a useful idiot to be able to fulfill their mandate, what they ultimately are trying to control. And in the Kali Yuga, the Black Lodge rules is because the Black Lodge's job is to see to the destruction, the weakening of the foundations of humanity, to help facilitate the destruction of humanity, to help bring about the devolution and the degeneration and the death of humanity, in the same way that the body starts to crumble and fall to pieces, and you have all these autoimmune disorders, and the body starts the autophagy goes off the rails, and the body starts breaking itself down. When the life, the fire, the spark has left the body. And when the spire of the Farc has left the cultures, has left humanity, because that spirituality that Tiffany was describing is lacking in our public discourse, is that not indicative of the fire that's missing, the fire that's going out? We talked last week about the fire, about the passion. Look at the generations. Generation X, we are the last passionate generation. Millennials, Gen Z, they're completely unmotivated to do anything of any. They can't even watch videos that are longer than 2 minutes. That's why their preferred platform is TikTok. They can barely watch long form videos, let alone read a book, let alone watch an actual full length documentary or documentary series or whatever. The fire has gone out. They're not getting married. They're barely having sex, let alone getting married, let alone having children. The fire has left this humanity. It can't survive. Which is why I strongly feel that the events that are taking place right now in the Middle East are going to precipitate and are the beginning of the end. Because the generations after us, they're just going to peter out, and they're going to be nothing burgers. We have negative population growth in all the major Western industrialized nations, including China. In fact, China, turns out that there are no billion people in China. You just do a search on YouTube for empty cities in China. And we're not talking about those cities that were the overbuilding, the over planning by the Chinese government, the central planners who built entire cities that are sitting there empty. No, we're talking about like villages that have been emptied out, like old school villages that have been sitting there in China for like 1,500 years that are completely now empty and devoid of people. They're ghost towns. China is filled with them. Some estimates are that China's population is maybe anywhere from 1/2 to 1/3 of what people have been estimating, or what the government has been saying China's population really is. So that the War of Armageddon, the final war, it's past due. And who's going to fight it? The millennials aren't going to fight it. Gen Z isn't going to fight it. I mean, these are kids who weren't allowed to wait for the school bus by themselves, let alone walk to school by themselves. They are going to go and fight a world war? No, I don't think so. We're due. We're due. And like it or lump it, it's something that was prophesied that has to happen. It's something that's going to happen. It's inevitable. And we may be witnessing the first volleys, the first salvos of that final conflict materializing before our eyes. So it should give us all pause and make us all reflect on our own lives and on the book of Revelations, and what is that book saying about us, about what we need to do in microcosm. Because let's face it, what's happening in macrocosm is going to happen. It's going to happen whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not, and it's going to happen. There's no stopping it. There's no preventing it. If somehow, Tiffany, magically, you were given the keys to all the television stations and all the radio stations and all the streaming platforms and all the YouTube channels and the Twitch streamers and the TikTokers and the OnlyFans and everything else, and if tomorrow, with the keys in your hands, you could put a big banner on the bottom of every screen, of every video, of every live stream, of every performance, of every mediated piece of slop content, and you could put a big yellow and black banner scrolling across the screen on the bottom, and put that message that you had shared with everybody. And that message was, what did you say? You said, go and sin no more. Okay. Right? Just imagine this a lot bigger. And imagine you could put that on the bottom of every screen, on every computer, on every phone. And you could do that tomorrow. I'm here to tell you it would fall on deaf ears. Because the people who have the capacity to comprehend this and why it's important, they already are not sinning. Or at least they're not harming others. They might still be harming themselves, but they're not harming others. They're doing their best, at least. Because the people who know this. And the people who don't, won't, can't. No one can wake anybody else up. Is it possible that if things get bad enough out there, is it possible that a message like, I don't know, repent, for the end is nigh, like is there a message that's gonna get and reach people? But look, if somebody is reacting with fear and they're going to be in a place of fear, then even a message like repent, for the end is nigh, they're going to be repenting for the wrong reasons. They're going to be begging and pleading for their lives, for their existence, for their survival. They're just going to be animals backed into a corner, and the best defense is a good offense. And if that offense means selling, like, if these people who've already sold their soul to the devil, they're going to turn around and, like, obviously they're going to turn around and like any Benjamin Arnold, they're going to turncoat, right? They're turncoats. They have no allegiance. Their allegiance is only to themselves. So they're going to say and do, like, whatever they can in order to secure their survival, their ongoing existence. So what can be done and what should be done? What is it that you do if, when you're lying on your deathbed and you see the end is approaching? What do you do? And it's a bit of a cliche now because it's so it's been repeated so often, but it's a cliche because there's truth in it. And that is to die before you die. So that when you die, you do not die. The book of Revelations is just that. It's a book of revelation. It's a revelation, a revealing, an unveiling. It is a how-to guide on psychological death, the death of the ego, the death of the false self. And as I talked about several weeks ago, the tearing down of the temple and the rebuilding it in 3 days, which is the only way that Jesus could deal with the Pharisees. Whereas the Zionists, here and now, in this age, they are beset on a course of action whose ultimate outcome includes the rebuilding of the Temple of Jerusalem. Because mechanicity, materialist science, secular thinking, the mind, artificial intelligence is the Antichrist. It is the Antichrist. It is the beast that demands to be worshipped. And that everybody carries the mark of the beast on their hands and on their foreheads. 666. A beast in the mind, in the heart, and in the body. An inverted 9, where 9 is Yesod in the tree of life, but 9 is also one shy of a perfect 10. 9 is a trinity of Trinity, 3 by 3. The law of 3, masculine, feminine, and union of masculine and feminine, and the 3 factors, birth, death, and sacrifice. And what unites them is the cross. 3 times 3 is 9. And whereas you can't exist without masculine, feminine, and union of masculine, feminine, that's going to be there. And you know that, well, at least up until now, this humanity has no problem having lots of sex. It's the birth, death, and sacrifice part that humanity has a problem with. It's the 3 factors of evolution and revolution of the consciousness. Those are the factors of Christification. Even the banner that's going on the screen, go and sin no more, right? Even that is not, it's I'm all about the tough love, right? Yes, I can acknowledge live and let live, and I can even acknowledge live and let die. And sure, there was a time and there was a place for that, but that was okay. That was, you could get by with that. But not anymore. It's not enough. It's not enough. We're living in the Kali Yuga. It's not enough just to sin no more. We don't have the luxury of time. We don't have the luxury of who knows how many lifetimes ahead of us. We don't have the luxury of counting on others to take care of everyone. What are we doing? What part are we doing? What is the sacrifice that we are making? And are we taking the steps to die? Are we tearing down our temple and rebuilding it in 3 days? It's not enough just to go and sin no more. That's not enough. It's a good start, right? Start there. But if you are there, don't be complacent and don't get comfortable. And don't say, well, I don't harm anybody. I don't bother anybody. Live and let live. They can do what they want. And I'm just here and I'm just going to mind my own business. And I'm going to perfect myself and so on and so forth. And I'm just going to be great, wonderful. What are you doing for others? What are you sacrificing for the sake of others? And there's a line from the Talmud, and I don't know I can't say it in Hebrew, but it's he who saves one soul saves the world entire. Remember that, and stay awake, and stay observant, and look for the opportunities that present themselves for you to make a difference, even if it's in the life of a single individual, a single being, a single animal. And when you go within, ask for guidance, ask to be shown. And maybe you'll get nothing. Maybe you'll get static. Maybe you'll get silence. Maybe because your time hasn't come yet. Because maybe the world is not ready to receive the gifts and the sacrifice that you are here to make. I know that I have been going through this, and you know that I've been going through this because I've been sharing it with you. I'm an open book. And I've been sharing with you the struggle that I've had about all of these possibilities and all these ideas and all this capability and everything else. And it's like I'm given an opportunity, I've given a direction to go in, but then nothing. I receive nothing with which to follow up on it. So all I can do is look at that and say it was a test, and it was a lesson in non-identification and non-attachment. But most importantly, perhaps, it was a lesson taken from the book of Job, which is to have patience, infinite patience. That is the great virtue of Job. That is how we endure suffering, and that is how we must face what is coming. Because whether it's entire Swiss villages that get buried in a matter of moments, or it's volcanoes erupting on both sides of the world simultaneously, Mount Etna and Mount Kilauea in Hawaii, or it's earthquakes, or it's wars, or it's domestic political strife, or it's, you name it, earthquakes, tsunami, you name it. The chaos that is coming is here for our benefit, for all those with the eyes to see and the ears to hear, and the faith and the patience to endure, the perseverance to endure, and the resolve to suffer and sacrifice in the wake of all of that. And what that means, practically speaking, for you, I can't tell you what that means. You have to discover that for yourself. You have to go within to find the answers, or be as observant as you can possibly be and search for the signs and the symbols and the breadcrumbs around you to guide you in the right direction and to show you where the opportunities for sacrifice and to give of yourself and they appear, because it might be in a relatively short span of time, it might be that everything that you think you're here to do, or everything that you've been spending your time and energy doing, could even be your career, your job, your house, your car, your mortgage payments, car loans, etc. Like everything that defines your life as you know it, all of that hangs in the balance. So be prepared, but be patient. I can't tell you exactly when and how everything is going to unfold, but I can tell you that with each and every passing week, the signs are becoming more, what's the right word? More acute, more defined. And I can also tell you that Generation X, our generation, is the last generation equipped to handle it. We were the generation born to deal with this, to live through this, and to give of ourselves. And that's why we're the lost generation. We're the ignored generation. We're the most self-sufficient. We were the true free-ranged kids. We were the ones who were allowed to, we were after breakfast, we were told to go outside and come home when the street lights came on. We're that generation. And we're the generation that took no guff. We're the generation that said F you to all of the authoritarians and all of their rules and all of their, telling us the way it is. And we are the most rebellious, the most revolutionary, but we're also the least confrontational. Meaning the great revolution that we are here to fight is a spiritual revolution. It's a spiritual war. And our weapons will not be guns and ammo and sticks and stones and rocks and Molotov cocktails and IEDs. But our words and our actions. We cannot cast pearls before swine, and we cannot mix in those pearls with the slop. There's too much armor there. There's the great walls of Jericho stand before us. But we have on our side the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark that brings down the walls of Jericho. And when the walls of Jericho collapse and all of the big swinging dicks see their mighty empires crumble before them, and their stranglehold over the hearts and minds of humanity slip through their fingers, and all that's left is their own fear and their own terror, and the whole of humanity gripped by fear and gripped by terror. It's in that chaos and in that ruin and it's through the cracks that we can then reach out a hand and be true warriors of peace, be true warriors of the light, and make the sacrifice that we have been making our entire lives. If we felt that we have lived lives that have not been as meaningful as we had hoped, have not had the impact that we had hoped. Our time has yet to come. But I tell you, it is nigh. It is fast approaching. So don't lose heart and don't lose faith. Because Our war is coming. It's not a war of weapons and drones and missiles and airstrikes, and it's not a war of propaganda. It may indeed be a war of words, but not so much a war of words, but a war of the word, logos. So, like all warriors preparing for the great battle, the final battle, the Battle of Armageddon, arm yourself, steel yourself, sharpen your consciousness, and let go of all the superfluous things you're holding on to and carrying, because they have no use on the battlefield that is approaching. The temple will be rebuilt. The Zionists, let them rebuild the physical temple. But busy yourself with rebuilding your own temple in 3 days. But to do that, first you must tear down the old temple. Read the book of Revelations as a how-to guide in microcosm. And if you are concerned that you might not have the skill or ability or the experience to be able to extract from the Apocalypse of St. John that which speaks to your soul and that how-to guide, then I submit to you the following free course on glorian.org, and the link is in the comments, and there it is on screen. And we can read, this free online course reveals how you can discover the true meaning of the revelation or apocalypse of St. John, which is a critic and mystic scripture at the very end of the Christian Bible. And here is a quote. Much has been said and written about the apocalypse, the revelation of St. John. However, only intellectual speculations have been made, and the words of various authorities have been repeated. The present work is the result of tremendous esoteric investigations that were patiently performed by us in the supernal worlds. That's Samael Boyor from the Aquarian Message. As you can see, it's a long course. These are all the lectures. Okay, so the this seems longer than it actually is because some of these are just the transcriptions, right? So there's some duplicates, if I understand this. Yeah, so you can listen to these as audio lectures. You can also read along in the transcriptions. You can read them. You can go through this course however you wish. But if you haven't gone through this course yet, I'm telling you that the time is now. Benjamin says, in the Gnostic scriptures, the phrase a generation without a king often refers to a lineage or group of people who are free from the control of the lower material world and its rulers, including the demiurge. It makes you wonder, could that be similar to Generation X? That's interesting. I had not. Yeah, it could definitely refer to Gen X, or at least, as you say, similar to Gen X. I had not come across that expression, a generation without a king. But that definitely makes sense. It also makes sense why we're called Gen X. And Benjamin also says, I'd love to be that incorruptible, but I too wrestle with ego. Is there still redemption for people like us? Uh, by the way, Benjamin, the other Benjamin says, good eye. Um, yeah, you caught that. Look, redemption is there for people much worse than us. So take that for what it's worth. Of course, redemption is there. Of course, redemption is possible. And when you say, I'd love to be that incorruptible, but I too wrestle with ego, well then, keep wrestling. But what else can you do? Whatever you do, don't throw your arms up in the air and say, "Oh, well, I'm giving up because I still because I don't know what sorts of egos you might be wrestling with, Benjamin, but I know when I look at myself and I've said before that food is my drug, right? So if I fall off the wagon and I binge on some, I don't know, whatever it is, ice cream or crackers and cheese or whatever it is in that particular moment, I don't look at myself, throw my arms up in the air and say, "Oh, well, there it is. It's all over now. I'm corruptible and I can't be saved because I had some ice cream." Right? So whatever it is you're suffering from, whatever it is you're struggling with, know that there's a reason for that. And if you're struggling with it, and if it is a struggle, it's because the adversary has to be at the same level that we are at. Otherwise, it would be too easy. So it has to be a struggle. It has to be difficult. So keep at it and relax and just observe. And know that when you play chess, there's no point in getting yourself into a huff, right? When you're playing chess. Benjamin says the generation without a king was mentioned in the apocalypse of Adam. I'm not even sure if I'm aware of that text or where that comes from. So, but okay, I believe you. I'm not questioning the where you got that from. So, I do recommend this as a project. You don't have to do it. Certainly, don't spend. Don't try to do it all in 1 week or something because you'll overwhelm yourself. Take your time with it. Right? The end of the world is not happening in the next few weeks. So like let yourself work through the material and really digest it, right? Don't try to cram it all in all at once. It's tempting at sometimes, especially when the information is going to be so dense. But yeah, I would recommend that because I really do feel that we are, and when I say we're on the cusp, remember that when we're talking about matters of this nature, we're you know the culmination could still be years away. It's just that I guess this is a final sort of personal note. I was born for this. I have known this like intuitively for a long, long, long time, to the point where there was a time in my life where you might even say I was obsessed with prophecy. And I read from Nostradamus to Casey, and Sir Isaac Newton, and I read like dozens and dozens of books on end time prophecies, and I read them until I didn't need to read them anymore, and then I stopped. And then my whole end times, apocalypse obsession just vanished. And it was around that time that I then picked up Graham Hancock's book, The Fingerprints of the Gods, in which was shown to me or introduced to me the idea of a cyclical nature of humanities, or at least he doesn't necessarily come to that conclusion, although he says it's a possibility. But the notion of a pre-existing global civilization that was destroyed, followed by ours, which rose from its ashes, right? That in my life, I slowly was being unfolded for me everything that I needed to know in order to be where I am today, including writing the book that I wrote, What in Hell is With Us, which outlines what I call the 4 pillars of the Great Awakening of humanity, the metaphysical undermining, or the undermining of the metaphysical foundations of humanity, and mechanicity and mechanical nature and all of that. And there's a very real pause, a void that I'm now facing, an emptiness, a waiting, because it's like, well, I've done everything that I needed to do. I've gone as far as I can go, up to a certain point for this humanity in its certain state, and now it's a matter of waiting for certain things that need to unfold before I can continue with my work. And some of the things that need to unfold in macrocosm, as they also need to unfold in microcosm. Which means there's a tearing down of a temple that needs to be completed in microcosm, as it now is going to be taking place in macrocosm through the War of Armageddon. And some of the other catastrophes that are going to start slowly unfolding. And the tearing down of that temple within myself, well, I'm not able to practice white tantra at the moment. So I'm not able to do the tearing down and the rebuilding of the temple in my circumstances at the moment. And I won't until circumstances change in my life that allows me to be together with the individual with whom I am meant, well, with my spouse. Let's not mince words. So, which means I'm in a state of patience. I'm in a state of waiting. And while I'm waiting, once a week, I'm here to share with you, any insights that I have that I can share with you, any guidance, but also any insights with what's taking place out there in the world. And like today, sharing with you any resources that I am aware of that may be valuable to you as we move forward, and recommendations that I can make, and recommendations that you make and share with one another, like the 2 Benjamins today, right? And that and that you bring to my attention, because remember, I'm still learning, right? I've got a long way to go still. I have a lot of learning still to do. And one of the things that I have to accept is that although I have various different insights that I've been given that I can share with you, the reality is that, maybe a lot of the work that I have yet to do can't be done by me, right? Like there's too much of me standing in the way of it. And that's why there's a lot more psychological death that needs to take place. And that as above, as below, as within, so without, as in microcosm, so in macrocosm. That in my case, the recognition that, but in all of our cases, the recognition that we are a microcosm of the world. And so that if everything around us in the world falls into chaos, as in crumbling and cracking, and the walls of Jericho are coming down because of the power of the Ark of the Covenant, it is that same power that rebuilds the temple, within us. So let our own walls of Jericho crumble, faced with the fire of fire and the light of lights, which is what emanates from the Ark. But that Ark is inside. Does anybody have any comments or questions? I hope that this, today wasn't so much about, the nitty gritty and the details of the actual conflict and the politics and all that nonsense, because, it was about the esoteric implications of what's happening out there in macrocosm. And that specifically in the Middle East, and specifically the Zionists, and specifically the war that they seem to be instigating now. And I don't know if anybody else is addressing these issues, because, I mean, let's face it, I'm on the internet a lot, I'm on YouTube a lot, I try to keep abreast of the zeitgeist and the messages coming also from esoteric channels and different channels and history channels, and there's all sorts of like alternative thought channels, and that have many millions of followers, including like Joe Rogan and whatever. And amidst all of that slop, there's only a few channels that are explicitly talking about Revelation. One of them is, for example, Archaics. But he's talking about it, he's coming at it from a very mechanical point of view, from the point of view of mechanical nature. And he was talking about, the breaking of the seals, and he's talking about the various breaking of the seals and when this seal was broken, when that seal was broken. I'm not saying that his channel is entirely devoid of value, but it's a very problematic. You got to have a lot of discernment and take the good with the bad there, because there's a lot of mechanicity. He is a useful idiot of the Black Lodge. He doesn't realize it though. He's not aware of that. He's not a black magician. He's not out to dupe anybody. He is completely and totally convinced himself. But he is a false messiah. He is a useful idiot of the Black Lodge. And if you're very clairvoyant, you can see that. You can see while he's giving his live streams, you will be able to see or sense the dark presence standing behind him, watching over him, watching everything that he does. There's a presence, a dark demonic presence in his company, making sure that he remains on message, on their message, doing their work. But that's not to say that everything that he says is wrong or that it's right. So it's very, that's why I say discernment is so important. But he's one of the few people speaking openly about being in the end times. So it's a, I've done live streams in the past talking about the end times, but I don't think I've ever done a live stream that was so explicitly talking about the end times as being imminent. And so perhaps that my work too needs to change and needs to maybe, maybe I have to start making videos about this. And well, that's something for me to meditate on and sleep on. So we'll have more to say about this next week and in the future. Benjamin says, I agree with you. These rumors of war truly feel like signs marking the beginning of sorrow for humanity. What guidance would you offer so we may endure until the end? Thank you for sharing your insight. For starters, my recommendation is to go through this course and to have faith. This is all very new, obviously, even for me, in the sense of I might have been waiting my entire life for this, but the unfolding of it only started unfolding 72 hours ago. But look, Blatten, Switzerland was, I saw that and I said, okay, time to start paying closer attention. And then within 48 hours of Blatten, Switzerland being wiped off the map in an instant, Mount Etna starts erupting. And then a few days later, Mount Kilauea in Hawaii, starts erupting. And then a few days later, Israel starts sending sorties to Iran and starting a conflict, a preemptive strike in Iran. So it's like every 3 days for the past 10 days or 2 weeks almost, another major international incident has been happening. Oh, and if you want to add the BS riots in California, you can throw those in there as like salt and pepper, like just spice added, fuel to the fire. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's all very new, but it's been precipitous. It's been happening very, rather very quickly, and it actually started happening in and around my birthday. It's hang on tight, hold on. It's going to be a wild ride, but remember that, especially you, Benjamin, I mean, you're in Alberta, Canada, for heaven's sake. So you're going to be okay for the time being, right? There's no imminent threat that you need to worry about, and just keep holding on to your faith and keep observing yourself. And it's our fear that we need to get a handle on, because it's our fear that's going to be testing us perhaps most. And our empathy and our compassion for others, as we see, terrifying and terrible circumstances unfolding and many people losing their lives and their livelihoods. And I believe the expression, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Benjamin, but I believe the expression is, there will be much wailing and gnashing of teeth. It's not going to be easy to witness. But don't avert your eyes. Don't try to avoid it either, because in doing so, you will be robbing yourself of this most precious opportunity, which is to transmute, to transform the impressions and transmute the chaos, the lead, the wailing and gnashing of teeth, and transmute all of that suffering into the golden bodies and into conscious awareness and into love. That suffering serves a purpose, to chip away the excess, right? As Michelangelo said, the angel was already in there. I just chipped away the excess, when he was talking about carving David. The chipping away that excess, that's difficult. That's hard for us blocks of marble. But within us too, is that David that longs to see the light of day. So let our Divine Mother do that work of the divine artist and chip away at us little by little, one fleck at a time, one hammer strike at a time. But during a Kali Yuga, those hammer strikes can come fast and furious. So let it happen. Allow it. Allow the tsunami to come and wash over you and take with you everything that no longer serves you, and leaving behind only that which is qualified to give to humanity the precious manna from heaven that they are hungry for, and the water of life that they are thirsting for, that they can't get anywhere else, because Tiffany demonstrated why that is. So let all of that, absorb all of that, and let all of that go into your meditations and sleep on it, and let it inform you in your dreams and over the next week. Because times they are a-changing. Times they are a-changing. Leah says, thank you so much, Atlas. Blessings to you and everyone. Always grateful for your insights. Well, thank you for being here, Leah. I want to thank all of you for taking the time, as usual, to spend Sunday afternoon together with me and with all of us. And, well, we'll see what the next week has in store. And I, for one, am going to be spending a great deal of time over the coming week doing a lot of soul searching and a lot of, one-on-ones with I was going to say with Attlas, but no, we're going to be seeking counsel with Alux here, and for direction for myself, for where, because it's clear that it's it's not by accident that my computer's died and I had to go out and buy a brand new new computer with more power, with more memory. I got rid of Adobe. I've got and I've got a proper just video editing program now, and I've got the firepower, I've got the, Windows 11, I've got the reliability now, so-called, or at least supposedly. Everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. So I've been properly equipped now. Now it's only a question of what and how, right? So, and do I need to be the voice amidst all the noise, and the one calling a spade a spade? Do I need to be the one, the crazy guy, crazy Noah? Is that what I need to be? Is that really what I was born to do? Not be popular, not be successful, not be anything, but just be, and not even to be heard. Just be the lone voice crying out in the wilderness as everything starts going to hell. I mean, I wrote the book on it, didn't I? So maybe that's it. Maybe that's what I'm really here to do, is make videos every day and talking about what's really happening. And maybe being branded a crazy man and a kook, just like Noah was. Maybe that's just part of the job description. Maybe it just comes with the territory. I mean, I'm already the black sheep of the family. I mean, the family already thinks I'm crazy. So, I mean, I'm used to it, right? But these are the kinds of now life questions, vocational questions, and I'm now asking myself, because I've been waiting a lifetime for this. And I'm 52 years old. 52 years. I've been waiting, knowing for a vast majority of that time that I'm here to do something. I'm here to do something fairly important. And now it seems that the time is fast approaching where it could be finally here. But what exactly to do and how exactly to do it? That's where the clarity is required. And I know I'll receive it. I know I'll get the inspiration. I'll be given the direction when it's time. And believe me, you will all know it as well, because this is a conversation, this is a sharing. I'm an open book to all of you. You know, because in sharing that process with you, I hope that there's potential for you to learn from that, whatever you can, and maybe take a page from my book and apply it in your own life, in the search for your own meaning, your own purpose. Because if you are here, I don't know if you get a readout on live on StreamYards telling you how many people are watching this, but I get a readout, and according to StreamYards, there's 10 of you watching this right now, and I think that may also include me. So there's maybe 10 of us right now. Last week there was 14 of us watching, believe it or not. That's one of the highest numbers I've ever recorded. So in other words, each and every week, there's very rarely more than a dozen people. And usually it's less than that. So if you're here, you are in a very, very, very select minority. And what you receive during these talks, during these live streams, you have to appreciate how few others are privy to this information. And maybe you can say that, well, then maybe that proves that it's not valuable. Or maybe you can look at it and say, well, in your heart that that's not true, because otherwise you wouldn't be coming back every week. I don't need to toot my own horn. I don't need to convince you of anything. You have your own innermost that keeps bringing you back here. So take that for what it's worth. I've told you very often before that the path of the bodhisattva is a path of suffering and sacrifice for humanity. It's the path of the few, and so is the path of gnosis. It's the path of the few. It will never be mainstream. It'll never go into the majority, right? So whatever it is that we end up doing and how we end up doing it, if the Titanic is going down, we save one life at a time, right? One soul at a time, one handful of souls at a time. And I'm sure we'll get into details into all of that in the future. I want to thank you all again for being here. I hope you have an excellent week. I wish you all the very best. And I wish nothing but peace and equanimity, even in the wake of whatever may be over the horizon. And I pray that if you have family or friends in the Middle East, I pray for their safety. I pray that they will be untouched by whatever is unfolding and needs to unfold, and that if you can encourage them to get to safety, to please have them do so, because at the end of the day, we also have to be practical. So I know I have a friend living in Iran, and unfortunately, I haven't heard from him. But I pray that all is well with him, and I'm going to be following up with him as well this week. So, there's also practical implications to be had as well. So we can't ignore the fact that we're still mortals and we have mortal problems to deal with as well. So it's not all throw the baby out with the bathwater either. So there's a balance to be had. And maybe we'll get into that a little bit more in detail as things progress. Because again, as things change and the walls of Jericho start crumbling and start coming down, we can't rely on anything anymore. And depending on how bad things get, I don't even know how long it's going to be that we can rely on the internet. So that's why I'm going to continue doing this for as long as I can, and we'll see what I'm told, what other work I'm given to do, what other assignments I'm given to put forth, to put out there online, and whether I have to start working on a new book or whatever the case may be. So that's all remains to be seen, how that all unfolds. But again, as long as you keep coming back, you're going to be in the loop. So because we're all in this together. So if there's no other comments or questions for today, have a great week. I look forward to seeing all of you again next week. So until then, I bid you all a fond farewell and inverential peace. Take care, everyone.